a lot of these talks were, and I figured we could take it back to the basics for a little bit. I just saw that like Vitalik was tweeting some stuff about how like 6 times 2 equals 11, so I figured everyone's minds have been blown enough by this space to keep doing that crazy shit. So,
11.
all right, and I'm here on behalf of Nervos and SidePit. Nervos is a layer 1 proof of work blockchain. It has a UTXO account model just like Bitcoin, but it also has abstraction as well, so you can do smart contracts on it. And I'm also here with SidePit, which is a layer 2 blockchain futures exchange with no KYC as in know your customer, but we have know your crypto, right? Because you can track everything on the blockchain. So that's what I'm going to talk about today at the end. But first, I'm just going to do a little rundown on game theory as I understand it. So game theory is a mathematical study about strategic interactions among rational agents. Basically just trying to, decide or figure out how people are going to react to a certain set of trade-offs and incentives in any game situation where there's win and loss scenarios. And it can apply to cooperative games, non-cooperative games, all types of things. And game theory is really everything.
You want the rest?
It applies to economics, it applies to sociology, it applies to security, it applies to computer science, social media, really everything you see and interact with in life, even dating on dating sites is all game theory. So it's a very important thing to understand the fundamentals of and study. And one of the easiest introductions anyone's ever gotten to game theory is The Prisoner's Dilemma, which is a non-cooperative game where 2 prisoners are basically being interrogated by police officers trying to get them to confess about a crime. And if person B confesses, then the other prisoner gets 8 years and they get 1 year. And if person A confesses, they get 1 year and the other person gets 8 years. So they kind of see that as an incentive to rat the other person out. But if they both remain silent, they actually get this interesting payoff where they both only get 2 years. So they take, it's a situation where they're not communicating, so they don't know each other's strategies and decisions, and they take them into separate rooms and try to get them to confess. But if you're with your ride or die in life and you really trust them, you know they're not going to rat you out, and they know you're not going to rat them out, and you can get this equilibrium state where you both sort of get a good outcome. Because if you both confess, you get 5 years. So it's whether or not you trust each other, and that's basically the problem that Bitcoin and blockchain tries to solve, which is trust assumptions. So a Nash equilibrium is basically where each person who is aware of each other's strategies and 2 opponents in a game, they're aware of each other's strategies, and they understand that there's no incentive to deviate from a certain strategy because they have nothing to gain after considering their opponent's strategy. So in the Prisoner's Dilemma, the equilibrium occurs when participants choose to betray, and neither has an incentive to unilaterally change their strategy. So the stable state underscores something that's really important to blockchain and trust mechanisms that we use cryptographic incentives to create, which is the challenge of reaching an optimal cooperation due to the self-interest of participants. And this emphasizes the tension between individual and collective rationality, which we'll get back to. So there's two types of games that we're going to talk about. There's actually 3. So there's zero sum and positive sum, and then negative sum games. Zero sum is basically the sum of the value that each opponent gets out of it equals 0, which means that one guy has to lose for the other guy to win, and that's very prevalent, and it's all over the place in economics and finance these days because of how the systems are designed to basically screw over the other person in order for you to win. Positive sum games is when the sum of the economic value and the outcome of the game is greater than 0, which means that both players can win. And then negative sum is basically worst case scenario where everyone loses. So in a zero-sum game, rational actor seeking the greatest gain for himself or herself will necessarily be seeking the maximum loss of the other actor, like I said. And then a positive-sum game, rational self-interested people will actually benefit each other with the same choice that benefits themselves. So that's kind of what we want. We want to create positive-sum games, and that's what crypto, in my opinion, through my lens and my research, is fundamentally about. It's about creating positive-sum game theory. So Bitcoin's game theory. Satoshi, in 2009, proposed a peer-to-peer electronic cash solution with no trusted third parties, right? Which means that you can independently verify the current state of the network without trusting anyone, because all you have to do is look at the proof of work, and you know, because of the incentives and the cryptographic proof that the work was done for the longest chain, you know that that is the correct chain, and that's what everyone will come to consensus on naturally. And that's a convergent property of consensus. So Bitcoin is blockchain is a state architecture, cryptographic acyclical history of transactions. Like I said, publicly and independently verifiable. It's objective, which means you don't have to rely on social consensus to understand the state of the network. You just have to see the proof of work was put into the chain, and you know that energy was expended to get to that convergent chain history. And it's also tamper-proof because of the energy expended makes it it's economically infeasible to double spend transactions. And then after each block is produced, it becomes more and more infeasible to double spend, to the point where it's basically ridiculous to consider a double spend being possible. You would have to spend, billions and billions and billions of dollars to reverse a transaction that happened a few years ago. And you'd have to do it without actually gaining any of the block subsidy that's given to the honest miners. So you're actually you're really at odds to try to hack the Bitcoin network, and that's where we're at. We're at highly secure, digitally time-stamped chains of transactions, and it creates just a fair and trustworthy economic ledger that is probabilistically, basically it's as close to zero probability of breaking down the network as you can get, as we've ever gotten to when it comes to these distributed systems. And like I said, objective and tamper-proof, and proof of work solved the double spend problem because the rule is that you have to follow the longest chain, and eventually, even if a node or a miner gets two competing chain histories, which is known as a fork, it only exists temporarily, because eventually the next block will be produced on top of the chain, and one will eventually win out over the other, and all of the hash power will converge onto that one chain that is out-competing all the other chains. And that's why I said it's a convergent. The consensus is convergent. It eventually reaches into one unified truth for all of humanity. And that's the longest chain. So a little bit more about the Bitcoin game theory is that a new trust model was born because we could transact and hold our own digital cash without having to trust anyone. You could independently verify the network, the state of the network, and the state of your holdings without having to trust a third party. And Nick Szabo made that famous quote that all trusted third parties are security holes. So by removing trusted third party, we remove a lot of fundamental security holes in the system. So this gave us a digital cash system that's truly peer-to-peer and independently verifiable. But how? And the answer is incentives. Because Charlie Munger famously said, "Show me the incentive and I will show you the outcome." Blockchains are not only trust machines, but also incentive machines. So Bitcoin's reward mechanism, like I said, has a Coinbase subsidy that happens every 10 minutes on the 21 million supply schedule, and it halves every 4 years. But it basically incentivizes rational miners to behave honestly and not cheat the system and not create double spends. So in essence, Bitcoin used game theoretic incentives and mechanism design, which is which is reverse game theory. Game theory is studying the rational outcomes and behaviors of people and the choices they make in a game, whereas mechanism design is creating a system with incentives, reverse engineering it so that you get a particular outcome. It's sort of like guiding people to the desired outcome that we all want, but we struggle to trust each other to make that outcome happen. And that's how we solved money. So Bitcoin is a digitally native self-custody, which means ownership of assets that can't be revoked, confiscated, or censored from transacting. And this started a Cambrian explosion of applied mechanism design for economic systems without a nation state, which is important because nation states have a lot of trust issues. You have to put your trust into a democratic system of individuals who might have their own desires, but Bitcoin and blockchain are basically preordained rules that everyone has to follow via the consensus laws, and if you break those consensus laws, nodes will just reject your messages. So there's no permission in Bitcoin, there's no KYC, and no censorship, which means true autonomy and freedom of association for the entire human race. And this meant more economic opportunities and low trust, high entropy environments. Also, the rational equilibrium for miners to behave honestly and not double spend the transaction was created thanks to the Satoshi's incentive design. So this is the power of economic incentives built with cryptography. Blockchain is an open, public, permissionless digital commons as well. So it's non-rivalrous, non-exclusionary, so therefore by definition is a public good. And where the benefits and incentives of the individual are aligned with the incentives and benefits of the collective, which is how you solve the tragedy of the commons, which is where your own intrinsic incentives to keep taking as much possible from a public good at the expense of the collective, and you basically end up depleting the public good. So solving tragedy of the commons is very important for humanity to go on and prosper and not collapse. So Bitcoin is very, very important. Crypto economic design is a proof that we can create win-win positive sum games for all of society. And this is just information asymmetry, which is where one opponent knows something that the other opponent doesn't, so that there's not symmetry in the information, which means that there's basically they have a knowledge advantage, and in game theory, whoever has like the most alpha and the best knowledge will always win. And this creates these toxic incentives in finance and economics. And one of the examples is moral hazard, because moral hazard is where you basically protect yourself from consequences because you're in a privileged situation. And the example I like to use is bailouts, because in 2008. The bailouts basically protected the banks from screwing over the average person, getting their mortgages, like basically making people lose their homes, and they lost nothing because they just got bailed out from all it. So bailouts is a good example of how people just if they're protected from consequences of their decisions, they're going to take advantage of that. Another example of toxic incentives is centralized top-down generation of money. Central banking and printing actually causes the Cantillon effect, which is where increasing the money supply and diluting its purchasing power actually steals from the people and gives it back to the rich, because they're in control of printing dollars. So they essentially, by printing more dollars, they're devaluing everyone's savings and giving themselves more money. And we saw that work perfectly during COVID, right? They printed $4 trillion in reaction to COVID and just gave it to a bunch of banks and big corporations, while the average person suffered. And DeFi is a good example of turning economic systems into public goods that are permissionless, trust minimized, auditable, and more secure from collapse via incentive design. So what is Neuros and SidePit? Because that's what I'm here to represent. And essentially it's new abstractions. Nervos is a layer 1 abstraction that has several key properties. A RISC-V instruction set architecture, which means that the virtual machine that you use to write smart contracts and run the blockchain and interpret it is actually written in RISC-V, which is an open, public, locked instruction set architecture that basically it's so simplistic but flexible that this leads me to the next point, is that there's no hard-coded cryptography or data structure in the Nervos blockchain, which makes it as abstract and flexible as you can make a blockchain, period. And the CK byte token model solves state explosion. The state is like basically a snapshot of the current account balances of the entire network and all the smart contracts and everything. It's not the same as history. State is basically current transaction state and account balances, whereas history is like the chain of events that show you how we got to the point. So state basically gets larger and larger as more smart contracts are deployed and in UTXO space, more unspent transaction outputs are generated, and there is no current solution in Ethereum to solve the state explosion problem. They proposed state rec models, but they never really got through. And what that means is that if you want to run a full node, you have to be synced up with the entire current state of the network. And if the current state of the network is too big, if it gets to hundreds of gigabytes, if it gets to terabytes, then you can't run a full node on a Raspberry Pi, and that arguably is consequential. It basically means that the network is less decentralized because someone with very low tech standards, with not good bandwidth or storage, cannot run their own full node, which means they can't independently verify the network, which means they have to trust a third party, which means that it completely negates the entire value of using a blockchain. So the CK byte token model basically uses one token equals 1 byte of data storage on the state, on the network. So there's a certain supply limit, and it creates an upper bound where the state cannot grow to a certain point. And what that means is it actually creates like strong value capture, which means that since it's so expensive to use layer 1, it actually pushes transactions off chain, which goes into how we scale the system, which is it's literally it has economic incentives to push scalability onto layer 2. And like I say here, solving state explosion solves the new tragedy of the commons, which is that if the state gets too big, it completely neutralizes like the value that we tried to create to begin with. And then here's SidePit. So just as Satoshi solved money and the double spend problem in asynchronous communication networks via incentives, Jay Berg, right here in the front row, is a high-frequency trading Wall Street veteran and has been writing code in Bitcoin since 2010, and even before that, he's been working on like Bitcoin and exchange stuff. So he's really been in Bitcoin since before Bitcoin existed. If that's not interesting enough for you, I don't know what is. And SidePit is basically a distributed limited order book on layer 2 Bitcoin that solves exchange, and it eliminates front running, MEV, high frequency trading, and flash crashes. And the reason that institutional money doesn't come into crypto is because of flash crashes and price manipulation. And that's why they basically choose to use OTC trading desks instead. So when people say, where's the institutional money? It's because it doesn't want to be here. It doesn't have the incentives to be here. So solving that will basically bring in a lot more money than we have ever seen, and ultimately this will really give Coinbase a run for their money. So this is kind of in conclusion. I just want to say that we need to finish what Satoshi started. Satoshi used incentives to overcome trust issues, to overcome asynchronous communication in distributed networks, and we have the ability to create win-win positive sum scenarios for all of humanity, and that should be our top priority as blockchain enthusiasts. That's it.
Got a question.
Yeah.
Can you explain what's on your T-shirt? What is it that you're doing like with that?
All right. Yeah. So I have a Nervos University T-shirt.
What is Nervos University?
So Nervos is the layer 1 blockchain I was talking about, and Nervos University is basically an initiative to do these open and free online courses that give people a basic education and understanding of the fundamentals of blockchain, as well as the fundamentals of Nervos, because we created new crypto-economic primitives, standards, and abstraction. So I think that when you create such a profound design in crypto, you're just as important as Bitcoin. And that's something that's worth educating to the world. So I think that Nervos is blockchain. If you want to understand blockchain and where crypto-economic design is going, you have to study Nervos. And
CKB is blockchain?
What's that?
CKB is blockchain?
CKB is blockchain.
Turn around, let's see the back. Let's see the back.
Yeah, but if you want a business card to check it out, I got them right over there.
Yeah.
If you want to talk to Jay, because we're still in that phase where we want interested investors, but we want to get a organic grassroots movement as much as possible so that we can sort of front run the VCs.
What's the benefits of being a Nervos University graduate? Like what?
So the benefit to being a Nervos University graduate is you basically become part of our community. We will teach you about the fundamentals of blockchain, game theory, how to create win-win scenarios, and we will basically teach everyone. We'll teach everyone how to get rich. Okay.
Do you get like a certificate, like a certification at the end?
Yeah, you do get an NFT certificate at the end when you graduate, and it'll be more valuable than a Harvard degree.
Wow, beautiful. That's amazing. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions before I step off? No.
You should keep going, keep cooking.
No, I gotta leave room for everyone else, dude.
All right.
Gotta be
Okay.
nice.
Okay.
Can't take over the world yet. All right. Thank you so much.
Nobody has any questions? Good job, Will.
Pass the ball.